what we do and what's been most impactful for us at Jump is not really segmenting audiences based on specific interests or behaviors or devices, etc. It's been allowing the creative to do the targeting for us.
Hey, what's up, guys, and welcome to Growth Mentors, the podcast where we share snackable growth hacks, strategies, and best practices in how to drive maximum marketing impact and grow your bottom line. I'm your host, Matt LeBlanc, and today we're going to be talking about audience segmentation and targeting on Facebook, or rather, how a lot of those standard practices and approaches are not as relevant or as effective as they used to be. So we are going to teach you the way that some really savvy digital marketers are approaching targeting and audience segmentation on Facebook now. So to help us do this is the Director of Paid Media at Jump 450, Dave Armstrong. Dave, let's jump right in. Why don't you just give us some context? What is audience segmentation and targeting?
Yeah, Matt, audience segmentation and targeting, it really just boils down to dividing a total addressable market or a total targeted market into smaller, more specific groups.
Sure.
And then eventually, if you're smart enough, you would tailor your marketing efforts towards those specific groups. And I think it's also been long taught in marketing, in the digital marketing space especially, but overall, that audience segmentation and targeting are key strategies and how to get your campaigns to perform. So I think something that we'll talk about today is how that's not really the case anymore.
Great. So we're talking about Facebook. When you're segmenting an audience on Facebook, what are kind of the options for segmenting and which ones are most effective or should even be used?
There's a few different options. So there's inside of Ads Manager in Facebook, you can go into your specific ad set and you can target demographics, so age, gender. I kind of throw like job title and those random ones in here too, even though it's not technically the right definition, but it's the best spot for it. You can target and segment via device, iOS, Android, mobile, desktop. You can segment based on behaviors. So Facebook actually knows certain behaviors about people. Those are people who are like engaged shoppers or frequent travelers. Those would be considered behaviors. Then you have a huge swath of interests. And interests can really be anything that you can think of. You can go everywhere from cat lovers to Bose headphones to Liverpool Football Club. I think I have some Liverpool stuff behind me, so I'm not sure if anybody ever sees that when they watch me on these podcasts. But those would be examples of interests. Geographic, that's fairly self-explanatory. Maybe you only can sell to people in the US. Maybe you can sell to people worldwide, but your ads only work when they're in English. So you can basically target via geographic location. You can also technically throw language in that one as well. And you can also, even though this isn't technically a heavy segmentation on audience level, I kind of view it this way. But you can also, you can argue that day parting and day of week advertising, I think, can be viewed as audience segmentation too. And my argument for that is if you only wanted to target night owls and you only wanted to run your ads during the time of like maybe 8 p.m. to 4 a.m., those are obviously a different segment of people who are going to see those ads versus going from 4 a.m. to, I don't know, 5 p.m. or something like that. And then the other last, probably most popular one for everybody who listens is lookalike audiences.
Right.
Lookalike audiences are not just meta specific anymore or meta exclusive anymore. I think they were 6-7 years ago. But you can build variations of lookalike audiences on TikTok. You can do it on Pinterest. You can do it on Google. But Facebook, I believe, was where it originally started. And lookalike audiences, I'll try to give a brief definition. Let me know if this makes sense to you, if you have any other questions, Matt. But lookalike audiences are basically a meta-built batch of users. And Meta, for the US specifically, it uses 2 million person segments, and I'll talk about what these segments are in a second. But they're built off an uploaded list. So they're built off a custom list, basically. We call those lists seed lists. I'm sure people have different names for them, but an example of this might be I have 1,000 customers who have bought my product. I'm going to upload that list of 1,000 customers to Facebook, and Facebook's going to build me a lookalike off of those 1,000 people. So
Sure.
it's going to figure out how many of those 1,000 people are actually on Facebook, how much does Facebook actually know about that matched group of users. Then they're going to build me a list of people from 2 million at a 1% lookalike up to 20 million for a 10% lookalike, and that's in the USA only. You can target lookalikes in other countries too, but those specific numbers are for the US. And it'll give me a list, basically. I can make a 1% lookalike, I can make a 2%, a 5%, a 10%, or any combination in between. And basically what that means is your 1% is the 2 million most alike people in the US to your uploaded list. So it's kind of convoluted. Hopefully that makes sense. 10% are the 20 million most alike people to your uploaded list. Does that make sense, Matt? Sometimes lookalikes can get a little convoluted and hazy.
Yeah, I think ultimately what you're saying is none of us are snowflakes. Uniqueness, originality, these are just concepts that we hang on to. No, yeah, that does make a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah, the other part to that too that I will add is lookalikes, they still have their place, I think, in various circumstances, but Facebook just knows so much about all of us now, and it's a little creepy, but at the same time, it's marketing. It's what we try and use to sell certain products and services. And with the knowledge and the algo behind what creates the lookalike, that's how Facebook's just continued to expand and get better with their targeting. And now, what we'll get into here in a second, I'm sure, is that typically people aren't really even targeting anymore
Right.
because the Facebook algorithm's so strong. And that part of that is because of that I don't know, an initial lookalike kind of foundation, I think.
So Dave, that's a great transition. Why don't we talk about why a lot of these, approaches to targeting and audience segmentation are really no longer relevant to digital marketers, and what we're doing instead?
Yeah, it's a really loaded question, I think, because for literally my entire life of being a digital marketer, which has spanned, I think it's been like 10 something years now on Facebook, specifically, I have never really spent 20, 30 plus percent of my budget or a client's budget on specific targeting and segmentation techniques. I've
Right.
typically only gone broad. And when I say broad, usually I mean there's some sort of age breakdown, and that really depends on the type of product I'm selling. If it's obvious I need an age or a gender breakdown, I'll use those.
Mhm.
But typically when I say broad, I mean I'm not using any other targeting techniques other than some small demo sort of breakdowns. And the reason why I just talked about that whole spiel within that lookalikes sort of conversation is because that that evolution of Facebook's machine learning, Facebook's algorithm, Facebook's ability to find our audiences correctly and quickly and efficiently really boils down to our creative. So, in a nutshell, what we do and what's been most impactful for us at Jump is not really segmenting audiences based on specific interests or behaviors or devices, etc. It's been allowing the creative to do the targeting for us. So
How do we do that specifically? Because as you're kind of
yeah,
saying, this is definitely our standard approach at Jump, is to let the creative do the targeting for us. But at this point, kind of in the world, this is what I would say probably most savvy digital marketers are doing when they're targeting audiences on Facebook. Yeah. So how do we target with creative concepts?
yeah. So basically, when I say we let the algo do the targeting for us, I really mean that. We barely put any kind of like parameters in place, but we, on the ad level, we test various creative messages in various different creative themes,
Right.
and we see how the algorithm goes after different segments of users. When I say different segments of users, an easy way to understand this is actually looking at the types of creative themes or creative messages that we can run. So everybody knows what UGC is nowadays. Years and years ago, when UGC really wasn't a thing anymore, we had interview style, or now we have podcast style, and those are kind of in the same UGC sort of mindset in a sense.
Sure.
But on the other side of the spectrum, you have super branded assets. You can have various different types of messages like price comparisons or sale promo messages, reasons to buy, different logic or aspirational messages. You can have us versus them competitor messages, and even creative themes in general too. And you take all of those themes, and there's probably a million others that I haven't mentioned, obviously, but you take all of those themes, you take all of those messages and all the combinations between them, and you can see how a specific theme might attract one type of user, and another theme might attract another type of user. So
Right.
users who, when I say the algorithm does the targeting for us, users who respond to or engage or convert on, say, a UGC price comparison type ad versus users who respond to a branded sale promo type ad might be part of a completely different segment.
Sure.
There might be some overlap, obviously, too. There's not really a great way to tell that within today's, like the ASC campaigns, for example. But you can view on the behaviors of those types of users who's clicking on particular ads at a higher CTR, what types of costs you're going to have to pay for one theme versus another theme. And then depending on the ability or the advanced nature of your tracking and analytics setup, especially if you have clients or if you're a brand who has a more advanced setup and you're able to track down to the ad level, you might see that users who purchase on that theme A, they might have a higher repeat purchase rate, or they might have a higher LTV than users who come in on like the sale or promo creative or that theme B, for example. So viewing the segmentation that way has been more beneficial for us too. One of the other reasons for this as well, and this is actually probably one of the bigger reasons, probably should have said this earlier, but typically the prices that are charged, and on Meta, this is in a CPM level, typically your broad audiences are charged substantially cheaper than your interest or your lookalikes or the various other types of segmentation that you might use for those particular audiences.
Would I be correct to say that that's even Facebook sort of like guiding us towards this broad approach? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think so too. And we'll talk about ASC campaigns, I think, here in a second, which also leads us into that same sort of mindset of allow Facebook kind of the freedom and the reign or the reins to be able to find these users. The other item too on sort of that CPM level conversation is, it should be talked about too, is that actual conversion rate. There are good times and places to use audience segmentation. All the stuff that I've been talking about from this point previously since we started this conversation, Matt, is basically only prospecting. I think there are solid arguments and there's solid evidence to, obviously you need to use audience segmentation when it comes to retargeting.
Sure.
There are certain toggles on ASC, for example, that you can use to target existing customers or various audience segments from a retargeting perspective.
Sure.
So I want to make sure we have that distinction in. And then sometimes too, depending on how niche your product is, depending on the actual audience necessities or audience essentials for using your product. I kind of mentioned this a second ago, but if it's a female-only product for age 50 and up, or if it's a set of kids rollerblades, it might be smart to start to use some audience segmentation there. But that's when I go back to, you should always test these types of things. There might be these outlier examples where you can say, hey, the ukuleles that I'm trying to sell are they're only being bought by this group of people in Washington State or something like this. So maybe you have a separate campaign targeting those people in Washington that have a really high conversion rate, and you can outweigh the deltas that you might see in the increase in CPM. But you wouldn't know that until you tested it. So that's always kind of the caveat that I like to have here. But typically, what we see at Jump time and time again, especially over the past few years, has been to allow our creatives to do the targeting.
Excellent. Yeah, because different types of creatives are going to unlock different types of audiences. And this really speaks to the idea of taking big swings with your creative concepts as well. So if you're listening to this and you're testing a lot on the social platforms, then you're probably really sick of hearing like test, test, test. But it is the truth, and it's always just more inspiration to take bigger swings with your creative concepts. Don't get too stuck in the weeds of fussing around with this font or that font or this shade of green versus that shade of green. If you're looking for performance, you're really trying to find creative buckets to A/B test against each other and really unlock all different types of audiences for yourself.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great point, Matt, is take bigger swings. Don't get too focused in on like the little, like you said, like the font or like the color change here and there. Is like that might help you 1%, but if you actually focused in on building 5, 10, 15 different creative themes and you found 5 that really resonate with your audience, all you got to do is now refresh those and maybe continue to test a couple more across the year, kind of a thing. Take those bigger swings. It's going to have much bigger impact on your campaigns and your performance.
I'm going to try so hard to fight the urge right now not to go down a path of, but what about brand identity? Let's move on. Dave, let's talk about maybe a client or a use case where we've, targeted this way. It sounds like we're doing it with really all of our clients, but maybe we could just kind of like walk through the kind of like head to tail example of how this worked for one of our brands.
Yeah, I think I honestly could pick any brand out of a hat, and like I think I might just do that in my mind right now. So I'm going to say like, say we have a coffee company who's a client, and in order to put this sort of hypothetical into practice, basically we'd have 2 options, right? We'd have specific segmentation targeting, and then we'd have our broad approach with creative doing the targeting. So hypothetically, if we have this coffee client, we could target interest-based coffee lovers or coffee lovers as an interest on Facebook. Or we could go completely broad with no targeting, with minimal or no demo targeting. We just go male, female, 18 plus. How this might play out, and I'll try and be as fair as possible to the lovers of audience segmentation out there. I think if you're listening to the Jump podcast, you're probably pretty aligned with how we do things too. So we might generate a high conversion rate from the coffee lovers' interest with the same ads that we're running towards the broad audience or the broad ad set.
Yeah.
We probably will be spending a higher CPM for the coffee interest than we would on the broad audience. The other thing that might happen, or the other thing that would happen, is we would probably be degrading that interest audience faster than the broad audience. 2 reasons for that. One is the amount of ads that you can push are, in terms of volume, are most likely lower, or they should be lower if you have the same sort of ad testing strategy that we do, versus the broad audience. The audience is obviously massive, right? So if you have a broad US-based audience, you've got 300 plus million people in it. The coffee lovers' interest, you probably have 100 million plus or 150 million plus, so maybe it won't degrade as quickly as, say, a more niche interest might. But that's actually this is a huge area too, which I know we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but the biggest area in specific to detailed targeting segments, which is what these are called on Facebook, is that Facebook's basically deprecating these anyway. So if this doesn't tell you which way that you should be testing, If I'm not telling you properly which way you should be testing, the actions that Facebook and Meta is taking should hopefully steer you in the right direction too. But they've basically already deprecated specific detailed audience segmentation and testing because back in a couple of, I think it's been over a year plus 2 years at this point, but you used to be able to specifically just target coffee lovers. Then you had a toggle where you could say, hey, can you expand my audience? Now that toggle's always on. So you're always expanding that audience. You can kind of try to steer the algorithm towards coffee lovers if you want to. But it's auto expanding and those choices are basically gone. So that's one key area that I needed to mention. And the other key area is that everybody who's run campaigns on Meta for the last, I think it's been a year and a half plus at this point that this has gone more mainstream. But there's obviously been a huge push into ASC campaigns, right? So Advantage Plus shopping campaigns, you barely get to touch any parameters when it comes to targeting now. So that should also tell you, hey, you should focus really heavily on your creative. And we haven't talked about this at all, but you also should focus on your funnel too. So those are the two kind of key points. We've been doing that at Jump since I got here 7-8 years ago, whenever it was. So we're obviously refining this as we go through each day, and we're trying to come up with more innovative tactics and different things of that nature. But focusing on creative has been the single most impactful sort of tactic and strategy that we've focused on for probably since I've been here.
Absolutely. And if you are listening and you want to hear more about creative tactics, creative strategy, creative production, you can check out our channel and our feeds. We've got a number of different episodes on that. We just did one talking about user-generated content best practices. So giving you a lot of setups and settings like that to get the most out of your smartphone device and also your video creators so that you can really invest into the creative that you're putting out there. Dave, was there anything else that you wanted to touch on?
I don't think so. I think that was short and sweet today, so we'll just stick with that.
Excellent. And I might be kind of barking up the wrong tree here, but you sort of mentioned this before. Who would be the group that is still hanging on to traditional audience segmentation and targeting? Is there a camp of people? What is that philosophy? What are the reasons to do that? Maybe somebody's going to adapt that right now and decide they don't agree with anything we just said.
Yeah, that's a really good question. In my experience, the larger companies, the Global 2000 type companies, the Fortune 500 type companies have been slower to adapt to these types of changes. It really depends on the personnel inside those companies, though. I'm not going to call out every single Fortune 500 company because it's not true. But they're individual people who are really stuck on how different segments do. Obviously, those are the slower ones, I think, to move into this sort of area. The strategies and the innovative tactics such as these, even though I don't think of this as innovative anymore, because like you said, it's been a decade since I've started doing this. But the more innovative strategy, I think, is led by performance marketers and growth marketers and direct response marketers, affiliate marketers even. So those are, I think, the quickest people to move and to figure out what the next best hack or strategy is going to be. And then steadily people sort of catch on to it, which is why we continue to try and innovate in different ways. So we're always staying ahead of the curve. I like to call it the bleeding edge of performance marketing, which is where I think we sit as a growth performance engine, or performance growth engine. So those are typically what I would probably, those are the type of people I would call out in a sense for moving on a little bit quicker.
Absolutely. So if you're listening to this podcast or really any of the podcasts that we're putting out, then, be rest assured that that's, how we see ourselves is a performance growth engine that's sitting on the cutting edge of these tactics and strategies. So hoping that the advice and strategies that you got today will be helpful to you. And if you are listening and you are interested in exploding your own digital growth, you can get in touch with Jump 450 in the link below in the description. That is www.jump450.com. And don't forget to subscribe for more weekly episodes. We'll see you next time.